everyone. Thank you for joining me for my live chat. This is Sharon Palmer, and I'm really excited to be talking with my amazing guest and fellow dietitian, nutrition expert, Denine Rogers. We are going to be talking about this important subject of cultural humility in the food system. So welcome, Denine. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me here. And thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you.
Oh, it's just wonderful. I so appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. Just a little bit about Denine. She is, as I said, a fellow dietitian, and she is the owner of Healthy Living. It's a private practice, integrative and functional nutrition and wellness counseling business in Douglasville, Georgia. She's a fellow of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, of which I'm a member as well. And she has her BS degree in clinical nutrition from Howard University, a master's degree in complementary and alternative medicine, and a graduate certificate in herbal medicine at the American College of Health Sciences. She works full-time as a telemedicine nutrition consultant with Anthem and is a co-chair of the Anthem e-commerce committee of Apex. She is a leader in the diversity movement in the field of nutrition, and she's the current chair of NOBIDAN, which is a national organization of Blacks in dietetics and nutrition. Plus, after all of this, she still has time to be a master gardener in her community, and she teaches people in her community about gardening and herbs, all the things that I care so much about too. So welcome, Denine. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yes. I mean, you just have so many things. When I read off your bio, it's like we have a lot in common because you're passionate about a lot of the same things I'm passionate about. And, I wanted to just kick off our conversation and let you give us a chance to learn how you were attracted to the field of nutrition and how you became a registered dietitian.
Well, it happened all the way back into high school, which it's been a while.
Yeah.
I had a incredible opportunity as a student intern and during the summertime with General Foods, which is a big major corporation, but now has changed over and became Kraft General Foods. So where I live in New York, they had an open opportunity for all students of diverse backgrounds to come and volunteer for the summer. Well, not volunteer, but get paid for the summer, really. They paid us. So I worked in the Consumer Affairs Department, and I also had the chance to work at their food test kitchens. And from there, I was able to decide, wow, I didn't even know nutrition was like this. I didn't know that dietitians did this. And I met corporate dietitians, which kind of made me really interested in the field. As one of the things about as dealing with the corporate dietitians, a lot of times they had chances to answer, different questions that consumers might have on their products, which was interesting. I like the fact that they did surveys and focus groups where you can get kind of a lot of ideas of what your consumers really want out of the product and what things they did not like and like. And then also they were able to write different articles and doing recipes. Now the test kitchens was great because if you haven't eaten, you can eat some test food. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's really bad. So as a teenager, it was a lot of fun because you kind of like, they say, okay, why don't you try this? It's like, okay. And you're like, ooh, okay, I didn't eat lunch yet. So, but if you're really that hungry, you can go in the test kitchens and eat. So it really helped me to really learn more about nutrition and dietitian, as becoming a dietitian. My boss at that time was one of the few Black VPs in the General Foods area, basically basically Kraft General Foods. She was one of the first.
Wow.
So she was my mentor. She kept me on all the way through college. So it helped pay for my college. And I really appreciate her so much. Her name was Paula Smead, and she's still here. She's no longer with the company. She retired, but she's been a really big inspiration for me. And she told me, why don't you go into nutrition? And I said, well, you're not a dietitian, you're an MBA person. She said, well, it's something that you're going to get into, that might be something. And then she allowed the local paper to interview me. And I was able to make my favorite brownies I used to make. Don't make them anymore. They were too fattening. Let's just say that. So, but it just gave me a chance to really look in the field that I never even knew it existed. And it also gave me a chance to see different areas of the field too. So that's really how I came about looking and become a dietitian. And then I went for my associate's degree in nutrition, food nutrition, in Westchester County, well, basically Westchester Community College, which is in Valhalla, New York. And then after that, I transferred, went to Howard University. So,
Mhm. Wow, that's amazing. You know, there are so many incredible people out there that don't realize the influence they have and to change people's lives. Your mentor was an example like that. I had someone like that in my career, professor who just took me under her wing. And, you know, I was discouraged in college at one point, dropped out. And if it weren't for her, like actually taking time to encourage me, you know, I went back and finished my degree. So there are amazing people that don't even appreciate how valuable they are. And so I appreciate your sharing that story. And I also think it's interesting because I think a lot of people don't know all the different things dietitians do. Like you were describing this interesting work with, you know, with the food industry. And, you know, dietitians are working in the food industry. I think a lot of people think dietitians work in hospitals, which a lot of
yep.
them do. And, you know, our listeners out there, we have a lot of dietitians that follow us, but we also have people that are interested in healthy eating. We have people in the food world following us. And dietitians out in the United States do a lot of things. They work with sustainable food systems. They work in marketing. They write. They do media. They do different types of counseling. They have different specialties. So I think it's interesting to show all the different opportunities that there are for dietitians in this country, which is exciting. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about your personal nutrition philosophy, because you have this really interesting background in nutrition with, you know, understanding alternative medicine and herbal, you know, functional nutrition, those sorts of things. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what your optimal nutrition wellness philosophy is.
Well, my optimal one is that I try to look at myself as a whole person, meaning like if I'm feeling down and I run for a cookie, why am I running for a cookie and trying to eat it? So I try to, I believe that with food that you're not just only looking at just something to digest and just eat. I believe that food should be not just only a comfort, but also a mind-body experience. So I look at the person, whenever I speak with people, I said, think of food as how is it going to affect your mind? How is it going to affect your body? How is it going to affect your lifestyle? So I try to look at it in that aspect. Like with herbs, I look at different types of herbs and using in my cooking. Like if you use turmeric, you know, sometimes that can help out with the GI system. So if I feel like, you know, my stomach is kind of messed up, I put that in there and I try to make myself feel better. Also, I see how certain foods that kind of give me little pickups. Another thing again with turmeric, I make like golden milk, and that kind of really helps out with just not only my stomach area, but also every other part of my body. So there's just a lot of different things. I use food as a way to nourish myself, but then also how is it going to affect me as a whole person? So usually what we use is like with the integrated functional medicine type of way of thinking is that food is like a mind, body, spiritual experience, but it also deals with your lifestyle. So if you're like a person who's always on the run, you want to take time to eat. You want to take time to sit down and just meditate and eat the food and use it and let your mind know, okay, it's time for us to eat and that we're full, that we're not going to go back for seconds or thirds, not knowing that we just finished eating or that eating while watching in front of the TV. So my philosophy with that is more of a lifestyle type of thing, which is kind of some people say, well, that's kind of, you know, way off the left field type of way of thinking. But it works out for me because I feel like food is very ingrained in our lifestyle. It's whenever we see friends, the first thing we go is say, okay, let's go to a restaurant, or we say, okay, let's go and eat instead of like maybe going for a walk, or let's
Mm-hmm.
go and eat something quick so then we can get through the day, and then not knowing later on that we're having problems sleeping or having GI problems or whatever issues that we may have. So
Yeah.
so that's my type of personal philosophy with food. So I'm sorry to get too in deep depth in that.
No, I think it's really great because, it's not just nutrients. And I think, in the nutrition world, sometimes we just got so focused on like the vitamins and the protein and the fiber and like, without thinking about the whole person and about food culture and about choices and what makes people feel good. And, there are a lot of issues in that area. People are more interested in learning about that whole body sort of aspect of eating and nutrition. So I think that's really important that you include that in your practice.
Mhm.
So I appreciate that. And I'm a huge fan of turmeric too. I use it every day. And there is research that shows that it reduces inflammation. I find that when I take it, of course, I'm having it in my diet, but I also take it as an example. It helps me, like just all the little aches and pains, the inflammation, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
I'm finding it helps me. So I do think there's a place, I drink chamomile tea before I go to bed because it helps me sleep well. And there is research on that, right? So,
Mhm.
there are things that we can do, within our diet and wellness. So I appreciate that. So I
Yeah, thank
wanted
you.
to just get right into
Mm.
some of talks. We're just going to plunge in on, first of all, talking a little bit about diversity. And, I wanted to ask you what you feel like some of the big compelling issues are when it comes to the food and nutrition world, when it comes to diversity. I know that's a huge topic, but I just thought maybe you could just, tell us what you think some of the biggest issues are and just kick this whole topic off.
Well, it's funny that you brought that up because I went to one symposium and we were talking about that. And I said, you know what? I think cultural appropriation is one of the biggest topics, particularly in the food industry. So, like when people think of Mexican food, they think of Taco Bell. So,
Yes.
if
Yeah.
they really want to know what authentic Mexican food is, they need to go to authentic Mexican food restaurant. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and just to give a definition of cultural appropriation is that it's the adopting of an element or elements person's one person's culture or identity and calling it as your own. So basically you're kind of like cherry picking what you want from that specific culture and then saying that that's yours when it is
Mm-hmm.
not yours, it was the other person's culture. So it, and using it as your own interest mainly. So one thing is that I always feel like that what people should do instead of doing cultural appropriation is doing cultural appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate and give the credit to and the homage to the people who created this type of cuisine or who created this type of culture. One thing is when someone basically with cultural appreciation is that you're someone that seeks to understand and learn about another person's culture in order to broaden your perspective and connection with others cross-culturally,
Mm-hmm.
where appropriation is simply you're just taking what they have and calling it, like I said, as your own. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's been a big thing in the food industry area. Same thing with everybody like Japanese food, Italian food. I mean, people just take one aspect and saying that, well, this is how it is, and we're the ones who started it, when in actuality it's
Mm-hmm.
not at all. So.
I really appreciate you bringing that up because I feel like that's one of the biggest areas it's just so obvious, but yet, people, I'm guilty of doing it. We've been doing it for a long time.
Mhm.
Many of us have in the food world, as a writer and a blogger and a cooking, plant-based cooking expert. I have learned a lot about that process and I'm educating myself, working on it, trying to do better. But this is really, it's so widespread. Don't you think that it's just everywhere in the food world?
Oh,
I
it
think it is.
is.
Yeah.
It is. And I'm thinking now that there is a movement right now that people are taking different companies and telling them, hey, you know what, you need to appreciate where this specific food item is coming from, with specific cuisine. Give the credit to those who did the whole thing in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And if you, even if you say, well, you know, this has been for thousands of years, well, put money back into that specific culture, put that money back into that specific community. Don't say that, okay, um, I basically, all throughout my life, I've been interested in eating a Pacific dish, and saying that, okay, I'm the one who's going to say that this is part of my business and I'm going to say it's my own. Why not put that money that you make back into the community and tell them, this is where this community is the one that started this cuisine. This is the community
Mm-hmm.
that was the one that needs that appreciation for what they have done. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's very important too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but like you said, it's so rampant now. It's gotten to a point that some people even boycotting certain companies and
Yeah.
industries for what they're doing. So
Yeah, and I think, there's the food industry. We see many examples, and and they're actually making changes. I mean, there's a lot
mhm.
more that needs to happen, but we actually have some of these high profile changes that are happening. And then I also think out in the food world, like as dietitians who are counseling people or like creating materials, I create recipes and cookbooks. I have a blog, and other people who are out there working in the food world in whatever way it is. There's just so much of it that's been going on. And I guess one of the things that I would have a question about is like, do you have tips for how to do it better? Like, for example,
Mhm.
I think you talk, and you and I have I've interviewed you before, and everyone, please go check out the article that I wrote on cultural humility. There's a version in today's Dietitian magazine, and I also have one on my blog at SharonPalmer.com, in which I interviewed Denine Rogers at detail about this subject, and other experts as well. But I think that, when it comes to me, I think there's I want to celebrate food cultures, and I think that's a good thing, right? But
Mhm.
there's that fine line between celebrating it and not practicing humility, right? And where is that line, and how can you know, like, if you're working in the food world, where that line is and how not to cross over it.
Well, the first thing is knowing what is cultural humility. So, what cultural humility is basically, involves you entering a relationship with another person with the intent of honoring their beliefs, their customs, their values. And this is like an ongoing process. It's not like, okay, 1 minute I'm going to do it, and then I feel like I'm an expert, and that's it. It's a continuous thing.
Yeah.
It's a lifelong thing that you have to do. It's a lot of self-exploration within yourself, critiquing yourself, knowing if you are giving that homage to that person and what they have done, understanding the willingness to learn from others. Because if you're not willing to learn from others, then you can't even go into cultural humility itself. Another thing is that one way that you can do is, like, if let's say if you do a recipe and you found out that this recipe is based on a specific culture, within the recipe, you can say, okay, this is the recipe, but this is the culture that it came from. And then maybe invite someone from that culture to explain about how this recipe came about, because there's always a story. And that was one of the
Mm-hmm.
things I really talk about before with many people, that everyone has their own diverse story, and letting them having a chance to tell their story. So I think that doing something like that can give a person a well about understanding of why it's important to give credit when credit's due, and also to understand that this person is a person, but they also, you have to give more empathy and more understanding of where they're coming from as a person.
Yeah.
So, and particularly where they're coming from, that culture. So
Yes.
I know a lot of people say, well, I don't understand why certain cultures do this, certain cultures do that. Yes, it's different from everybody, because everybody is different. But is not to degrade them for their culture, is to uplift them is the main thing. Uplift for what they're going through and what their culture is about.
Yeah, I love the way you explain that, because, in our world as dietitians, we used to have a lot of emphasis on cultural competency. Like, you have to learn about the different, which is, I know that's part of it. It's good for us to learn about food
Right.
cultures and the history. I love all of that background and that knowledge, but we never really took it to the next step, which I now really appreciate that people are like moving beyond just cultural competency. It's now we actually have the humility part. So I'm really glad you're explaining that, because sometimes in practical settings, it's harder to grasp what that is. But I love the way you talk about it's a lifelong process of reflection and understanding and listening. And it's not just a one-time fix. And I have found that in my work too, where I go back and look at something I wrote 10 years ago, and I'm like, what did I just say? And then I see what I wrote 1 year ago, and it's still not good enough. So 1 year ago, I wrote it and thought, oh, I did okay. But I look at it a year later, it's like, no, I could have done better.
Yep.
So and for me, one of the things I'm trying to do, and I still have a lot of work to do in this area, is because I do love food culture. I talk about plant-based foods from around the world, and I've traveled all over the world. But that doesn't make me an expert in somebody else's food culture. So I have to be careful, and I want to lift other people up that are experts in this area. So what I'm trying to do is, when I write about food in Thailand, I reference a couple of my favorite experts who are from Thailand, and let them, like, check out what she's doing. She's doing amazing stuff. She certainly knows a lot more about it than I do. So I think for me, that's one thing I've been trying to do. But I also provide more history, more background. Do you have any other tips for how we could actually put this into practice? Any other specific things we could be looking at? Maybe some pitfalls that we're doing when it comes to not being as humble when it comes to all these, food culture issues.
Well, I think that for one thing is treat the person the way that they want to be treated instead of the way you want to treat them. I think it's great that you do reference others from different cultures that if you write a recipe or write a blog about, and saying, okay, learn about this specific person. This person is doing this about their culture. And I've myself has been through what you've been through too, and still trying to learn too, how I can, if I reference something, I have to make sure that, okay, if I'm referencing this, okay, what culture is this from? And try to include that person within within anything I write or anything that I say. So also I have to think of myself, okay, well, this person's very unique. This person, put myself in their shoes and understanding, okay, this is someone's talking about my culture, someone's talking about me. Why don't they have somebody in my culture that's a part of this article, a part of this speech or this presentation? And I think that that's one thing that we have to do. We have to speak up on it. Also, as dietitians, learn about other people's cultures. I think that sometimes we think that, well, I learn about this person because of what I've seen, but do you really, really know about that person as a person? And that's where the culture humility comes to play. I think that looking at different positive ways about that person's culture, instead of looking always the negative, because sometimes we always look at the negative parts, but then we don't look at the positive sense of why this culture is the way it is and why these beliefs are. Like, I never forget when someone was upset when I used to work at the hospital, someone was upset that patient just kept looking down and not look at them in the face. And the doctor was really angry with them and saying, like, well, why is this person looking down? They're not listening to me. And he just wrote on the chart, non-compliant. When actually in the culture, as a woman, you're not supposed to look directly in the face of some certain men and women. They don't look directly in the face of somebody who's superior in the profession. So as a doctor, they think of them as superior and they don't look at them directly in the face. So it's not like they are non-compliant, that they're not understand what they're saying. It's just that's part of their culture. So that's sometimes where cultural competency is a good thing to learn about the person's culture. But the next, like you said, the next step is cultural humility. And then there's now cultural, which is called comp humility. So meaning that cultural competency and cultural humility is merged together, and you need both of them in order to learn more about the person's culture and learn more about the person. So that's now the new big thing is comp humility. It's like a tongue, it's like a tongue teaser type of thing. Yes,
I haven't heard about that, but it makes sense. It's the blending of those two kind of, huh?
Yeah, because it's hard for you to know to use cultural humility if you don't know about the person's culture. So you need both of them together. And that's where they call it comp humility. It's the combination of both. You have to learn about the person's culture, and then you also have to have humility based on that culture. So even though you might say you're an expert in, let's say, Ethiopian food, let's say you think that you're an expert in that because you read up on it, but you don't understand why certain dishes are the way they are, why people eat from use their fingers, not use this utensils. Why is that? Why do families eat together? So there's a lot. That's where the humility comes in that part. So so you might be an expert in everything that's all the cuisines, but you might not know why the cuisines came about and why the family dynamics is the most important thing.
Yeah, that's a great example. That's a great example. And, I think it's so important for us to learn more. And I also like the whole aspect of this about cultural celebration too, like lifting, if I kind of keep that in the back of my mind. If I'm celebrating a culture, at least I'm in kind of the right zone, and then taking that and then having the humility and making sure that I'm, providing, sending that information back to that original culture and highlighting that culture. I think it's really important. Can you think of other pitfalls that you see out there that are examples of how people could, you've shared a lot of them. I was just wondering if there's any other things that you see out there that are opportunities for us to learn a little more.
Well, I think that I'll never forget, someone got mad at another person, no names mentioned, that they felt that this person should represent their whole entire race or their whole entire culture, which one person does not represent one specific area. So, as you know, the U.S. has vast varieties of different ethnic groups, different nationalities and races. So expecting one person to represent them and thinking that, okay, all people are just like that, then that's where one of the pitfalls are, particularly with culture. That's why it's very important to be very sensitive, being very responsive to cultural pluralism, which is basically where you have people with bunches of cultures, but not thinking that one specific person is going to represent all those cultures. So like myself, even though I do come from a West Indian background, and then also I'm originally from the North, when I came and moved to the South, I was not prepared to learn more about my own culture within my own race, which dealt with like the Southern cuisine. So when I saw grits, I thought it was plaster. Mind you, I was a food service manager at a major hospital. And when I saw it going down the line, I started getting mad, and I said, why are you guys serving them plaster? This is terrible. And they would just sit, and then all the people the food service workers, they just sat there and just bugged out and laughed at me. And they said, Miss Rogers, this is grits. I said, what? Mind you, my father's family migrated from the South to the North to find better work and also to get away from Jim Crow. But I did not know what I thought. Okay, the South I didn't know anything about Southern cuisine. I did not know anything about that until I started to work in the South. And then I realized, wow, you know what? There are more cultures within my own race that I did not even know. I knew there were, but I wasn't that in tune with it. So it's just interesting that sometimes we think that, okay, well, one person of entire race would represent that, but in actuality, there's so many different cultures within that Pacific race. So
Right.
I'll never forget
Yeah.
another story.
I
One
love
person.
stories.
Oh, yes. Well, one other story was this young girl. She is what we call Afro-Latina. And she was in school, and the teacher was talking about African American studies. So the teacher put her in the spot, said, well, such and such knows about African culture, African American culture. Can you explain? She's like, no, I don't. And she's like, what do you mean? You're Black. She's like, I am Afro-Latina. I don't know anything about the African American
Yeah.
culture because I'm not African American. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so those type of things is that where there's a pitfall in different cultures, because some people think that when persons from a Pacific race that they represent all cultures, but there's so many
Yeah.
cultures within that Pacific race.
That's a great point. And it also brings up, sometimes we make these generalizations, like we'll say Asian food, when there are so many
Hmm.
countries in Asia. Like, how can we say something as generic as that? I mean, is that kind of in that same vein of thinking where we need to really be more mindful of all of these different cultures rather than, creating these big, broad strokes?
I think so. I think that it's time for us to really indulge in learning about the different cultures, but then also celebrate within those specific cultures, and then also
Mm-hmm.
bring up different aspects of it.
Mm-hmm.
Even though certain cultures might be very similar, and a lot of times there are, but the thing is that what makes them so different and unique. I think that the word
Mm-hmm.
unique makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Individuality is the best thing.
Yes. And
Mhm.
I love what you also said about even people within certain cultures can have like microcultures or even different traditions. I mean, my husband is from Sweden, has born and raised there, his whole family lives there. And sometimes I make generalizations about Swedish food culture, but I'm only observing his family from one particular region. And I'm always
Yeah.
reminded, like, that's what his family did, but not everybody in the country might have that same food. And of course, we see this all over America, that we have different parts of America. And, we have a lot of stereotypes about American food. People think
Mhm.
that we eat junk food all the time, or, and not everybody eats that way. So it is interesting to really kind of look beyond some of these stereotypes or some of, these broad generalizations to really understand the food culture so much. And I think what's so amazing about America is that we have this beautiful, diverse population here. And that living in California, where I live, that's one of my favorite parts of living here. It's just, you're surrounded by so many interesting people from all over the world, and the foods are incredible. So I think that's something that is a great thing to celebrate and learn more, get deeper into the knowledge. And you touched on this too. It's like, it gives us an opportunity, when I'm writing about food, I cook a lot with tofu. Like, that's an example of a time, hey, let's get into the history of tofu. Like, where did it
Mhm.
originate? How was that an important part of the diet? And how did it evolve? So I think there are a lot of times that we can actually kind of raise these foods up, provide some more education, link it back to
Yes.
experts. So can you think of some other opportunities that we have in the food world to kind of move more in this direction of celebrating cultures? What do you call it? Cultural humility.
Complimility.
Complimility. Like,
Yes.
that's going to be a hard one for me to learn.
It took me a while because I even have to go on to one of those dictionary ones where they verbalize it. You hear this computer voice
Oh,
that tells
yes.
you how to say it.
I'm
So it took
always
me a
looking at those. I'm always mispronouncing things. Yeah, and by the way, all the listeners, I'm going to be sharing a lot of these terms with you. And Denine has a lot of resources I'm going to be sharing with you. I have a blog that's going to be going along with this live chat. So, don't worry about looking it up. It'll all be there in the notes for you. So yeah, I was just wondering, like, if you have any other examples of some opportunities that, that people can kind of share some of this knowledge, or, at least highlight it more, get into this more.
I think that the fact, which is interesting that I saw, which I was doing my research on before, there's an acronym called ASCES, which is A meaning ask questions in a humble, safe manner. Make them very open-ended. So when you're talking to somebody, ask them questions, make them open-ended. Don't say, well, I see that well, basically make them open, and meaning like, what's about your culture? You know, what is it about you that makes you so different? What is it about your background that makes you so different? What things are positive in your culture that you feel that should be celebrated? I think that saying something like that might make the person more open to explaining about, you know, what makes them unique. Because that's the whole idea, is that treating somebody as an individual, not treat them as a whole entire group. I think that
Yes.
that makes the biggest difference. The S in meaning seek self-awareness, you know, be aware of what you say. You know, don't group and clump everybody together. Don't say that, well, you know, I think that during let's say during Lent, everybody must eat fish.
Yeah.
Not that many people do that.
Yeah, that's a
Not that
great
many people during
example.
Lent follow what they're supposed to do during Lent. So
Yeah.
that type of thing, just being self-aware. The another S is suspend judgment of a person, which I think is really important, because all of us have what they call implicit biases. So we have to just be aware of how we judge someone. You know, what we think that, or what we were taught to think is this way, when in actuality it's not. You know, it may not be that way. You know, that's where you have to suspend your judgment and just be open. The E is for expressing kindness and compassion. So, you know, express kindness and appreciate the person who you're talking to, you know, have compassion of what they're going through on a daily basis. They may be discriminated on a daily basis, and they may have you know, very upfront attitude, and not, you know, upset or being angry or not trustworthy, feeling not trustworthy to the other person. You're just having compassion, understanding, hey, you know, I may not know what you're going through, but I can understand you as being a human being with, you know, have that compassion of, I understand how things are going for you right now. How can I help you? How can I assist you? And then S meaning support and a safe and welcoming environment, which is kind of like the same thing as that. And then the other S meaning start from where the person is at. Start where they feel comfortable in talking. If they don't feel like talking to you, then hey, you know, maybe another
Yeah.
time.
Right. That's great.
But you know, it's
I
funny because some people
Oh, go
believe
ahead.
like,
Go
oh,
ahead.
that's so sorry. But when some people who are silent and don't want to talk, it does not mean that they are just ignoring you. They just want
Yeah.
to just think of things over. You know, I think that a lot of people feel like you have to continuously talk in order to have a discussion, but just having that brief silence, just thinking,
Yeah.
you know, it makes a big difference.
Those are all great thoughts to really mull over. I really appreciate that. And it kind of made me think about one other thing, and that's how we make judgments on whether a particular, especially in the nutrition world, we do this, whether a particular food is healthy from another culture, or, you know, we're always trying to change it. Like, you know, well, eat like this, you know, when these food traditions could be very helpful within an overall diet pattern. And we're learning more and more about the health benefits of indigenous diets, traditional
Yes.
diets. And I think there's a lot of lessons there. I don't know if you have any points that also kind of adding to that whole conversation is this idea of like that we kind of created these superfoods. Like we discovered chia seeds and, you know, all these things that now we buy at Whole Foods, and, you know, we spend all this money and we're patting ourselves in the back for being so healthy. But these are ancient foods. In fact, in California where I live, the chia grows wild. I could forage it. This is a Native
Oh,
American indigenous
wow.
power food. But yet we kind of want to write about it like we invented it or something. We discovered it. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on, those are kind of two separate issues about the whole healthfulness aspect of traditional foods.
And I agree with you, definitely, because the more and more we're learning about our traditional foods and how they came about, the more we realize, wow, you know what, we really did eat pretty good back then.
Yes.
And yet we're not giving the credit for where it's coming from. It's funny because like I myself and a couple of my coworkers, we did a presentation on the African plate, and we took it from some of the stuff from old ways, so I'm definitely got to give them credit.
I love their stuff. They have
I
beautiful
know.
old stuff. Please go check out oldwayspt.org for their
Yes.
great cultural food pieces. And anyway, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that too, because a lot of times we didn't realize that some of the foods that were not indigenous in this country, they were carried over during the slave trade, and those seeds were brought there, and now these foods are indigenous to the specific region. So it's just interesting in seeing where certain food items come from. A lot of people have said, well, what is the African diet? Well, it's really more of a plant-based diet. A lot of people think that it's would be like more soul food, and there's nothing wrong with soul food. I mean, soul food is great, but once you really get an understanding of where the traditional diet came from, and particularly from Africa, you realize it's more of a plant-based food and more of a healthy one. They did a study where they had people from Georgia and people from Cape Town, South Africa. They switched their diets. So the people from Georgia had the soul food diet, and the people from Africa had their African cuisine, the ancient foods that they had. And come to find out that the people from South Africa, when they ate the soul food and continues eating it, they had bladder cancer. They had heart disease. So, so the people who were from Georgia and ate the traditional African diet, which consists of many different types of plant-based foods, come to find out that that helped out with their heart disease, that helped out with their hypertension, that helped out with and if they had like cancer, lessen the building of the tumors. So it's just interesting that now a lot of cultures are trying to learn more about where their food culture came from and how they came about. But then they also learn about more about themselves, which I think is really important too, and appreciating their culture. So
I love that study. I had not heard of it. What an interesting study design. You know, I think there's so much to learn. And I know the Old Ways has a beautiful African heritage pyramid, and it highlights, I'll include this in the show notes for this on the blog, but it really highlights a beautiful diversity of plant foods, the greens and the vegetables and the grains and the nuts, and such a healthy diet pattern, you know. And so I think we need to really, this is something that I'm really interested in, is putting more value on this traditional knowledge and not always looking at Western. You know, a lot of our research is based on Western academia and ideals, populations, study design, but we also need to value some of these old food ways, this traditional knowledge that's been handed down through the generations and the centuries, because there's a lot of acquired knowledge that is valuable. And you're probably interested in that area too. I know with your background in alternative and holistic nutrition and medicine.
Yeah, I'm very much interested. When we did my coworkers, when we did the presentation, we also learned about the different regions in Africa, why certain dishes are the way they are. You know, the more the dishes on fish-based would be more of the countries that are closer to the water, and more of the animal, like with the cows or goats, would be more regions that are closer to the mountain areas or more towards the desert or land areas. So you learn about that. Like, I know some people might say, well, you know, there's no such thing as an African cuisine. Every Pacific country that within Africa has a different cuisine, which is true. But what I think with Old Ways is that they took everything from that and then made it to the African plate with what they have in there too. So, but it's just looking at all aspects. But yeah, that I would love. I'm trying to learn to do, hopefully one of these days, with so many other things I'm doing, to write something and publish something about that, about different, regions and cuisines, and learning about the culture of certain foods, like why, what about like with ancient grains, what came about with that, why this specific grain is like this, what did our forefathers use that grain for, and what is the health benefits of it. So
I love that. Well, I would love to read anything you write about that. You have to keep me posted. But I wanted to share that Denine is provided us with one of her favorite plant-based recipes, her ratatouille with lentils. And I'm going to post that on the blog too, because I love to see what people are cooking and eating in their own homes. So she shared that recipe with me. And I just wanted to thank you so much, Denine. This has been such an interesting conversation. I think we could talk about this forever. It's just scratching the surface. And again, I have all of Denine's links and her resources in the show notes that come with this blog with our live chat. So check it out. And check out the article in which I interviewed Denine about this whole topic of moving to a cultural humility within our food systems. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining me, Denine. And we will see you next time. Thanks, Denine.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I really enjoy myself. And also just want to let you know that for those who are going to today's dietitian symposium, I will be doing a speech on cultural humility. So a lot of the stuff that you learned today is going to be even more.
Yes, I'm so glad you reminded me on that. I love that symposium. So, and that's going to be in May, right? When is that? May
19th on the Tuesday.
19th.
Well,
okay.
But it's from the 16th through the 20th.
Yes. So check it out. I will include that in the notes too, how to access that. It's at the Today's Dietitian Symposium, which is virtual this year. So that will be a great session. I can't wait to see that for sure.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Denine. I will see you later. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.